Hi, and welcome to The Circle. My name is Izzy Middleton, and today we're talking about cannabis. Should it be legal? Last year, the UK government authorised cannabis for limited medical use, but should they make it legal for recreational as well? Here with me today are Lena, Neil and Sergey. Can you tell us a bit about yourselves and give us an interesting fact about cannabis?
So I'm Neil, I'm a gap year student, and my interesting fact about cannabis is that as of 2015 it's been the fastest growing market in the US, and if it is to be made legal in all 50 states, then it will be a larger market than the organic food industry.
My name's Lena, I'm a sixth form student, and Ben & Jerry's are thinking of making a new flavour with weed.
Hi, my name is Sergey, and my fact is that cannabis contains active ingredients which are cannabinoids, and two of them are THC and CBD. So THC stands for getting you high, and CBD relaxing. It just relaxes your body.
Well, it's great to have you all here. I'm taking visual arts, film and media at Impington. My interesting fact about cannabis is that it has been legal in Alaska since 1975 and is still legal today. So ahead of the show, we interviewed 4 experts who have different perspectives on this topic. Let's have a look at them.
I think that cannabis should be legalised.
I think it should be legalised so that there can be safe regulation.
Cannabis is illegal.
Almost exclusively the people I speak to who are Class A users started using cannabis.
There will be many patients that will benefit from it.
It enabled me to feel more confident.
What it is that you're buying from somebody doesn't guarantee that it is the product that you're expecting to buy. There is no indication, no intention at the moment that there's going to be anything other than a Class B controlled drug.
Will appear on the screen behind me for us to talk about. We'd love to hear about your interesting facts, controversial opinions and hard questions. Please keep it PG, we'll leave out anything too rude. So the first question to the panel is, should cannabis be legal and why?
So I think cannabis should be legal for both recreational and medical use. I think the risk factors of it are much lower than, say, alcohol and tobacco, which are obviously legal. And I think that it has a lot of medical potential which hasn't been explored enough.
I agree with that. I think that for medical research it'd be very interesting, but I think we should be very careful in like how we go about it.
What do you think, Sergey?
I think cannabis should stay illegal, but only for medical purposes it can be legal.
Okay then. We have the police who told us about the law on cannabis in the UK, so we can have a look at that.
Cannabis in the UK is illegal. Cannabis, herbal cannabis and all its variants are currently categorised as Class B controlled drugs.
Cannabis used to be a Class C controlled drug, but was reclassified to a Class B controlled drug because of some of the risks and harms associated. The potential for causing mental health issues and triggering psychosis, particularly in young people's brains where their brains haven't yet fully developed, is deemed to be a risk in terms of cannabis.
We'd always choose not to criminalise a young person where we have the opportunity, but the fact remains it is illegal, and you'll very quickly burn through the options available to us at the bottom rungs of the ladder. And if you do get a conviction or even a caution for use or dealing cannabis, that can have a really bad impact on your future prospects.
Cannabis might just be a bit of weed, it might just be a spliff, it might just be a shared experience. It's a very sociable drug, and we understand that. But the government have dictated that cannabis is a Class B controlled drug. My advice to people is to make informed choices, to find out about things, be careful and look after yourself.
So, what do you guys think about what the police have just said?
I think it's very interesting how like she mainly talked about young people. I think it would be very interesting to see how many people over the age of 30 smoke weed and are not criminalised for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think they kind of inadvertently gave some reasons why it should be legalized, because like they were saying about young people getting criminal records because of it when it's a pretty minor offence. Really, I don't think that's exactly fair, and I think that that's a reason it should be legalized.
What do you think, Sergey?
I totally agree with police officers. So one of the officers said that if you start consuming cannabis when you're young and your brain is not developed yet, so it can harm your brain and you can have some disorders.
I agree with that too, because you can, like, I know a lot of people who smoke a lot of weed, and as a result it meant that their employment has it's not been good, basically.
And that is like one of the biggest risks that can happen if the weed will be legal. So all the young
don't
people,
you think that if it becomes legal, it takes out that aspect of, because it's illegal, it's going to be fun for me to do? Because a lot of young people look at what is illegal and they go for that, and they're like, that's adrenaline, that's fun, I want to do that.
I think so, yeah, because I read somewhere that in the US, teenagers in states where cannabis is legal don't actually smoke any more weed than the states where it's illegal. So I think people are kind of gonna smoke weed whether it's legal or not. So we might as well make it legal and take away the criminalisation of it.
I think it depends where you look at as well. There are some regions that obviously smoke more than others, and I think that's down to culture more than anything. But it really does, if you look at where the police sort of criminalise it, it kind of shows you a bit as well. But yeah.
We also spoke to a cannabis researcher who gave us her opinion on this issue, so let's see what she says about that.
I think that cannabis should be legalized for medical use. It's something that is starting to happen in all the world, and at the moment the experiences with other countries has been really good. There is a very good benefit for anxiety, insomnia, depression, chronic pain, even epilepsy. In the cases of the people who are receiving medical cannabis in a controlled way, at the moment we don't have any evidence to believe that they will have actually any kind of complication.
So weed is stronger than it was in our parents' day, so is it more dangerous now? So it's more...
It is if it's not controlled.
Yeah.
You don't know the levels that you're going to get.
Yeah, I think at the moment, which is there's a major factor that's stopping people from saying it should be legalized, is the kind of market that it goes through. So a lot of THC levels, so CBD and THC should be level, but a lot of it is the THC is much higher, and THC is what causes the kind of psychosis, and the kind of what's it called?
The feeling of being high. Yeah.
And when you see things aren't there.
But
you get what I mean.
But that's there
it's the bad part anyway.
There are some people that have positive impacts, but there's a lot of people who don't, and I think that's important to take into account. It's not the same for everyone.
Yeah, I think also, as the research said, there is a big distinction between the medical cannabis, where they're able to have very high levels of CBD, which is obviously the part of it which is, makes you feel relaxed and has, medically useful properties. So I think that's a very different ballgame to the actual recreational cannabis.
Yeah. Okay, well, there's a comment here. So there's weed flavoured ice cream, sign me up, which, I think it's more, it's CBD infused, so it's the medical kind of, but it's still the relaxing infused. But then there's, cannabis is known to be addictive. Wouldn't legalising it increase the likelihood of people becoming addicted to it? What do you guys think?
I've heard of people being somewhat addicted to it, but I think compared to alcohol and tobacco, it's much less addictive, and it looks like the commenter underneath has pointed out that that's tends to be more addictive if it's with tobacco.
Yeah, and also if we're comparing tobacco and cannabis, why is cannabis illegal and not tobacco?
That's true.
Because tobacco doesn't really have any, and it hasn't been proven that there are any like positive side effects apart from the fact that people say it de-stresses them, whereas the negative is gives you lung cancer.
I think it's just because when they didn't like illegalize it, they made a market out of it and it brought in money. So, which could be the same thing with cannabis if they legalize it. I think economically it's a good thing, but we'll see. Also,
I mean, if cannabis was legalized, it would potentially mean that people are using less tobacco in the joints they roll, which would be less bad for people's health. I mean, the NHS spends £2 billion a year on treating people for tobacco-based illnesses.
Sergey, what do you think about the comments that have been said?
Yeah, I think like it can be addictive if you mix tobacco with cannabis. So like, yeah, it can lead you to addiction, and
I mean, I think some people can become addicted to it because it becomes kind of like a gateway out of like being stressed, out of having to focus on things. It's a way of distracting yourself in a sense, because it kind of takes away that level of thinking in your brain, I believe. And then there's
But do you think, Izzy, that, because you also have alcohol and you have tobacco as those distractions, do you think by adding cannabis that will help everyone, or should we not surely find a solution to like avoid the stress and to begin with? Maybe it's the working hours that you should decrease or stuff like that.
I mean, I think it's hard to take. I think with cannabis and alcohol and cigarettes, they're a kind of object. Whereas if you go for like working hours, it's a wide range. It goes all across the world of, you can't limit something that's everyone is used to, like education. You can't just change one thing and expect everything to change. If you legalize weed, you can, it's legalized, it changes. Anyway, there's another question from Andrew Mitchell, I believe. According to the NHS, 10% of regular cannabis users become dependent on it, irrespective of tobacco or also nice surname.
Going on to that is, if cannabis does become legalised, it'd be interesting to see the impact on the NHS, whether there'd be more of a burden or whether it would help, because obviously most people would probably feel much more comfortable like seeking for help.
I think if we look at the two, medical and then recreational, like will there be more people asking for the medical, or will they see more people that have overdosed or had a difficulty with weed for recreational? There's the two different. What do you think about it, Sergey?
About what exactly?
About the NHS.
Do you think more people go to hospital basically because of it?
I don't think more people would go to hospital because you cannot get overdosed by weed, and nothing really can happen with you, so it's not that dangerous.
I disagree with that.
Still, it should be illegal.
I mean, it is dangerous in terms of the actions that you're more likely to do with it. Like, obviously, if you're smoking weed and driving, that is very dangerous. But the weed itself it's very hard to at least cause an overdose.
But the actions you do with it surely comes from the social pressure around you or your social circumstances.
It comes from what your. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes with what your choices are. I think, because it's not a. I don't think it. It pushes you to make this choice. It's just something that's. I mean, there is also the question of whether it leads to other drugs. So is it if it is legalized, will it lead to a harder, class A drugs maybe?
I'd probably say the opposite. I mean, I think that at the moment, I mean, the term gateway drug is very problematic, but I think that the reason why it is that people who are sort of class A users tend to start with cannabis is that it's kind of, by using cannabis, you're kind of crossing over a line, and it's kind of a slippery slope, but only because it's illegal, not because of the substance itself. So I think by legalizing it, that would make that less common.
There's a question I want to go back to from Jodie. Crouch, I think, and she said that when people say that cannabis de-stresses them, surely we should be educating people on how to de-stress rather than going straight to the...
And that's what I was saying, is you should go back to finding solutions, not just finding more distractions.
Yeah.
Otherwise you're just going to keep piling on more problems. It's not a good way to go about it.
To get an insider's knowledge of cannabis, we spoke to a former user who also happens to be my mum. Shall we see what her opinion is on laws around cannabis?
I think cannabis should be legalised for both recreational and medicinal therapeutic use. I think there is a huge body of people out there who have experience, very positive experience, where cannabis has been very useful for them. So I think it should be legalised so that there can be safe regulation. My experience with cannabis started when I was in my late teens. I was in the middle of nurse training. Generally, if I was really concerned post-work, if I'd had a difficult day, if I'd been dealing with challenging situations at work, bereavement or death, we used to support each other, and then just coming back and having a smoke would just soothe. I definitely don't have any regrets that it was a part of my life. I think it enabled me to get through some very difficult social anxiety times, and enabled me to become more confident with myself.
So what do you guys think about everything that was just said there? Sergey, should we go for you?
So as we all know, so cannabis, it affects all the people different way. So for someone it can be good, so a person can feel good, and some other person will be feeling bad, will have a headache. Yeah.
I think it's important to, this is where we go back to regulations and making sure that we do it the right way, because there's been a lot of times in the UK where we've legalised some weird stuff, but it's just we've gone about it too wrongly, and it's just caused lots of problems.
It's caused more problems than originally.
I think cannabis could be one of those things where if it's not done properly, there will be more problems than we started with.
I mean, I think the main thing is, if it is legalised as both medical and recreational, the markets need to be regulated in the way that it's what you were saying, in that it needs to be basically watched more carefully than it is, just to make sure that there's no one, there's no wrongdoings.
I mean, I'd say that maybe a possible sort of starting point at least would be, say, decriminalising cannabis and at least making it easier to come by for medical use, because as I said, that's a very different situation where it can be controlled much more easily. And I think that if we start with that and kind of see how it goes, and hopefully the effects of it would be good, and then the government can kind of go on from there. Yeah,
I think a lot of negative things follow cannabis, and this is what the young kids use. It's that kind of stereotypes. I think because of the positives that are coming out of the research that's being done, people need to be educated on that, and then they can have their own opinions on what they think, whether it should be legal and whether it should be then legal for medical or recreational or both.
I think that's why it's important to have different perspectives, and I think partly to blame for that is probably the police and how, I mean, it is their job, but there is a stigma and it doesn't help.
Yeah, I mean, also if weed was legalised, then that would make it much easier, I think, to do research on it. And because, as you say, it'd be less of a stigma, then people can be educated more on how to use it safely, knowing not to use it at a young age, knowing not to smoke it too often, because that's really when the problems arise.
Speaking of which, on research, I found something quite cool, which was a technique in the US used to split apart I think it's called the spliff, but basically they split apart what you actually smoke and what you don't need by using big bass amplifiers and they produce sound, and it's just the sound that splits it apart. And it's stuff like innovations like that which I think would be quite cool in like the industry that could potentially happen. That's what I like, that I would like to see, is good new ways of thinking, and hopefully using those ways in other things.
Because it'll introduce, like you said, new ways of thinking and more interesting ways and more, I think, engaging ways than just, you know, doing a questionnaire, because not everyone is interested. You know, it's becoming quite something quite boring to do. I think with and especially if it's going to be legalising, young people might use it. I think finding interesting ways to find more research and evidence might engage them more.
It's got so much kind of medical potential as well, which could be explored so much more. Like it has, I think like a particular marijuana compound has like potential to treat cancer, which is like pretty amazing.
We ought to find out more about science behind cannabis. How are the different chemicals affecting our bodies and what's good and bad about them?
So cannabis is composed by different cannabinoids. So one is the THC, that is the one that is associated with the psychoactive effect, is the one that after anyone smokes cannabis, that is why they feel high. There is a second component, that is the CBD, that will cause actually just the opposite effect. There is a specific kinds, actually people call them skunk, that is basically cannabis with really high levels of THC and lower levels of CBD. And that is the one that is associated with more mental health difficulties.
So something you're buying off the street might have a very high THC content. There are some indications in terms of smell, texture and general appearance, and word of mouth as well. But what it is that you're buying from somebody doesn't guarantee that it is the product that you're expecting to buy.
I would really struggle to trust cannabis, some of the cannabis today. I think the strengths are completely different. I think the engineered cannabis to be much stronger, have such greater THC levels. I find actually quite concerning.
So we are now having also plants that are just the opposite, really high strengths of CBD, low levels of THC, and can be used actually as a treatment of different conditions.
What would you take from that, Neil?
I think the point about the THC and CBD balance is really important to take into consideration, and from what I understand, it's because of plants being grown indoors a lot of the time, which leads to them having really high strengths of THC, which is obviously because people growing cannabis don't want to get caught.
Yeah.
But do you think that if we legalise cannabis, then obviously there'll be movement to grow them outside, but that will take up all the space of our normal crops that we use for livestock, that we use to eat?
I mean, I think when it's legalised, people will add it into, you know, normal things like crops, because it becomes a more normalised thing, and then maybe they'll go to and fro from, you know, oh well, this is for crops and this is for, you know, growing. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair point about land space, but in terms of the kind of environmental impact, like the amount of energy that's needed to actually you know, give enough light for indoor growing plants is pretty massive, so we would at least be taking that away.
Fair enough.
What do you think about what they said?
Yeah, so I can agree with that. It's dangerous because you never know what you're gonna get, what are you getting, and it's always dangerous, yeah. And it can lead you to something else. Like, for example, today you're gonna try cannabis, and the next day you will want to try something else. So people they always like to explore. They won't stop.
You would say that it could be a gateway for crime and or harder drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so, because people, they always want to explore, they won't stop, so they will get bored of the same thing.
I do sort of agree in that it is still a drug at the end of the day, and it gives you psychosis-like effects, and so some people, you are right, will more explore because they're curiosity, but others just can control that.
Well, I think as Jodie said here, people will always get a kick out of using something illegal. So if it is legalised, people will start using the next illegal drug, which could be a lot worse, like cocaine, for example. I think with that is I actually remember having a conversation with someone, and this person goes, I'd actually really want to try cocaine. And everyone around us is just kind of like, well, I mean, why? I mean, she said, well, I think it'll be fun to do. And I mean, if you have a look at cocaine, it has so many negative side effects. And also, one of the points was your teeth will end up like this. And I think there are so many, I think cocaine and like really, really hard drugs, people tend to avoid because it doesn't really show anything that's going to give them really like a massive kick, or going to give them any positive side effects, or going to give them anything that's going to, you know, do anything really fun. I think there is kind of like ecstasy and kind of the pill, which some people have problems with. I hear a lot of there are like a lot of things on the news with people at festivals who take too much, or people in pubs who take too much. But I think you know, people do get a kick out of everything, but I don't necessarily think that once weed is legalised it will 100% then move on. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason why people move on from weed to harder drugs is because there's no sort of separation, that they think, oh, well, I've already done weed, which is illegal, and I was fine then, so heroin, you know, shoot me up.
I mean, don't you think that would come even if it was still illegal? If they're going on the mindset, I've done this, so why don't I try this?
Oh, but it is.
I don't think so.
No, I see it all the time.
Yeah.
It's regardless. I think that's the most concerning thing is you don't know.
Yeah.
And we can only trial and error it but it's where it becomes, if we see like a massive problem with that, where more people are taking much harder drugs, then the government really needs to double down on the policies.
I'm just going from, I just had this thought of, you know, if the same thing was happening with cocaine, so if cocaine was being legalised in all of these different countries, you know, and if people were finding and researching and finding positive effects and negative, would we have the same view of should it be legalised, or would it be not, you know, for medical and or recreational?
I mean, cocaine's such a different kind of kettle of fish that it's really hard to compare, I think, because it has so many negatives and can't really be used in a medical setting at all.
If police, going back to police, if they think that, you know, they go on, oh, it just has the negatives, and because it's not legalised, we don't have that area of research, do you think that it could be possible that we could find that area of research that leads to positive things on cocaine or not?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't know, because I think it will just, I mean, if you were, can you imagine if we found loads of negatives for cannabis once it's legalised and be like, oh, damn, that was the wrong decision. But you can't go back to that.
No.
And it's the same thing with other drugs. It's the same thing with alcohol, it's the same thing with tobacco.
But I mean, it has been legalised in quite a few countries and the results so far are really good, so I think Britain could kind of take suit from that and
I
indicator.
have heard that Portugal, after legalising it, they found a massive reduce in crime in general, not just drug related. But I think it's the culture. I don't think you're going to get the same effect in the UK.
It's hard to say.
There's another comment from James Good. Would legalising cannabis reduce the price of cannabis and lead to rediscover in income for criminal elements?
I can say something about that. So I think the price will go down because it will be very easy to get it. So the drug dealers, they won't be able to make good money.
Yeah, they make an income from it.
And here is the answer for the previous question. So drug dealers, they will start to sell other drugs which are more dangerous, and they will be making their money, but so because that is illegal, so the price will be still up because you can't get it anywhere.
I just had a thought, if we had campaigns to educate people on how to make a business out of cannabis if it was legalised, surely we would be able to not get rid of drug use, but like be able to make a positive environment out of it where people still can receive an income but can also make new like innovations in a way.
What do you think about the comment?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said, that it's about kind of putting the energy into the right thing. And also, I mean, I think, sorry, I've forgotten the comment now. What did it actually say?
Can't remember, so let's actually move on to another comment. So there's another from Jodie. At school, the only education we get is to not do drugs. We never actually get told why we shouldn't do them, and I think with more education, less people would use it. What do you guys think?
I definitely agree with that. I think there's a lot of, because of the negative like connotations, people tend to avoid it, which does not help because we just kind of shove it under the bus, and it's not good.
I kind of agree with that, but I mean it's good that in school teachers will try to teach students that drugs are bad and like you shouldn't know about them, you shouldn't, so it's good like mindset about drugs, so the person never gonna try it, like student, he's never gonna try it if he knows it's bad. But once like you started to know more about that, you want to try it and you want to explore.
I mean, I think everyone, especially young people, they want to try all these new experiences, especially when someone says, that's bad for you, don't do that. I think people have quite a defiance, so like if you say, someone says no, they're going to want to do it, which it's fair enough. I think, what do you guys think?
I think, just putting more energy into educating people on how to use it sensibly, because it can be used sensibly, is like much more important than just trying to stop it.
I think especially in schools, they focus on negatives, whereas because I've never had a lesson on what are what's the positives, what research has come out of this, it's always the negatives. And I think when it's introduced, because it's introduced in kind of like year 10, year 11, and a lot of, in my experience, people have been like, oh, I know all about this, and they're all kind of like very obnoxious with it. And I think it would be helpful if we were educated as young people, and maybe even if older people were educated, because then they wouldn't see it as being a negative thing that young people do, and maybe it would help them in medical ways.
I agree with that.
There's a medical. Okay. The UK government has legalised cannabis for limited medical use, but at the moment very few people have access to it. So what makes cannabis so useful in medical settings?
There is one main component, that is CBD, that could have really a huge potential to be used to treat many clinical conditions: anxiety, insomnia, depression, chronic pain, even epilepsy.
From a pain management point of view, again, useful all round really, from muscle spasm relief, from an anxiety point of view, again, they just fed into helping me manage my pain.
Cannabis will not be good or will not be harmful for everyone. What we know with the research is that there are different phenotypes. That means that our brains will react in a different way. This is a great moment for medical cannabis, at least here in the UK, and we hope that in 5 years we will have enough evidence to actually know how cannabis works and if we can use it in a medical setting.
What do you think about that?
I think it's quite interesting, but I was just thinking through it, what would happen to sport and what would happen to, would people use it? Would people use it to help them? And I would very strongly disagree, because I think sport is one of those things where it's all you and it's just you. It's not with the help of
it's about your talent.
It's showing what you've trained to do. It's showing what you can do showing what the human body can do, and I don't think that taking drugs should be.
I mean, there's the whole thing with how Russia isn't in the Olympics this year because they were found that they were cheating, and there's been like loads of that over like various of the Olympics in the past couple of years. But yeah, I think it also comes under creativity. Like, will it make people more creative? Will it, make a bigger creative process for people, or will it stop that? What do you think?
I mean, I agree with all of that about not using drugs in sport, but I've never heard of people using cannabis. I mean, I might be wrong, but I've never heard of people using cannabis as like a performance-enhancing drug, because I don't think that's really the effect it has on you. I mean, it's a relaxant, so I guess athletes could use that, after training, but I don't think it would be sort of performance-enhancing in the same way that sort of speed would be.
I mean, possibly not performance-enhancing, but maybe for like your nerves before. I think it says it's good at de-stressing, so maybe they'd use speed for performance enhancing, but maybe they'd use weed for to calm their nerves before.
But I think in terms of a balance, it's either not let people use it for very legitimate medical purposes where it is incredibly helpful. Like, I mean, they were saying for epilepsy, muscle spasm reliefs, all that kind of thing. That kind of, for me, outweighs any negatives in the ethics of sport.
Yeah. But I do think it's a completely different area. If you're in that much pain 24/7, absolutely, there must be it's one option out of either pain or no pain. But if it's in other recreational uses where you don't necessarily need to take it, I don't see why you should.
That's fair. I mean, I guess at the very least, I think it should be legalized for medical purposes. I think it's kind of ridiculous it hasn't been. And also, you were saying about creativity. I mean, some of the best music ever, it's very widely known that it's been written under the influence of drugs. Like Bob Marley was buried along with a Bible and some marijuana. So it sort of says it all, doesn't it?
Another question. Surely there should be better medical alternatives for such pain and anxiety other than cannabis. I think that.
I think they've tried.
Yeah,
not gonna lie. I think they've tried.
And I think also if it was legalized, if we're talking about, then it would further research for whether we can use this or we can use another thing.
I mean, the painkillers that are being used at the moment are stuff like opium, which is much more addictive, or like codeine, much more addictive. So I don't really see what the problem is with cannabis.
A lot more negative side effects.
Yeah.
And especially codeine. Codeine's very addictive, and I think people are aware that codeine is a lot more addictive than cannabis is. What do you think, Sergey?
Yeah, I think so too. It's different drugs, like cannabis and codeine, they're completely different and different effect. And I think codeine is more addictive than cannabis, just by the information.
Should cannabis then come above codeine for to help people with anxiety and or stress, or should it, which would be more useful?
I think so, yeah. But people who struggle with anxiety, even cannabis is not the good way of treating it. So there is only they can find another way to.
It is very difficult to find another way, which is why people resort to cannabis and why people resort to an escape.
I think also there are with what's it called in the war when you
PTSD?
No, when you it's the food thing in the war.
What does it do?
It's when you I can't remember. Never mind. But there are always alternatives, and some of them won't be ideal. But if there's nothing else, then sometimes you have to turn for the things that aren't, but that can still have positive effects. And then maybe if it's just medical uses, then that's still like you're still like halfway there to getting the help that some people might need that isn't originally there or is originally there and is giving them more negative side effects.
I think it's important to have a good like supporting, like a good group of friends, honestly, like people who support you, who will kind of keep an eye on you, because if it does get out of hand, I don't think you'll realise it until someone tells you. And I think that's the most scariest thing of all.
There's another one from Jodie. If it is legalised for recreational use, over time people will start using other illegal drugs. Will we then have the conversation about legalising those drugs for similar reasons?
I think so. It will happen.
I mean,
I think so.
I think you'd have conversations, but I think, like we said before with cocaine, it doesn't really have any positive effects.
Can I just say something? So, so you can't get overdosed by cannabis, but the other drugs, if they will be legal, then there will be plenty deaths, and like people will die. So the other drugs, they will never be legal.
I mean, I think it's tricky because if we're looking at cannabis now, we are able to see the positive side effects it has, and we can't see that for cocaine yet. I mean, I'm not saying that there are some, but how do we know? Like, we're just basing the fact on what we know. We're not looking at what.
I mean, there is an argument to be made that all drugs should be legalised, which I don't personally stand by, on the basis that it's potentially a deterrent for some people, because there's not the sort of thrill factor in the same way, and that then there could at least be regulation. People could use tester kits more easily and that kind of thing. But I mean, we're talking about cannabis. I think the possibility of legalising other drugs in the future, while it may end up going that way, shouldn't be a reason not to legalise cannabis.
There's another one from Joe Mitchell. A lot of the time, the medicinal cannabis comes as the oil, so it doesn't damage your lungs and pretty much only helps with the medical problem. What do you guys think?
I think it just it's just another way of finding different medicines, different cures. But it goes back to you can trace any medicinal things going back years, because in Eastern medicine they use plant-based medicines, which cannabis is obviously plant-based, and it does affects to your brain. So it does make sense in my head that there's oils of it, because it's much more diluted than taking the actual thing.
Yeah, I mean there are even shampoos that are CBD infused, which I think is awesome. Anyway, what was your point?
I mean, from what I understand, it can be damaging to your lungs if it's used in very high doses, but compared with tobacco, it's not nearly as damaging. And a lot of the time it's because of tobacco, which is mixed with cannabis, which is why people have the same side effects obviously from it. So I don't think that's completely true about just using the oil.
Yeah, that's fair. Sergey, what do you think
about the THC oil? I don't really know much about THC oil, so I can't really say anything.
That's fair enough.
I mean, I think it's partly
I think it's more safer than smoking cannabis. So it's
I think a lot of people associate, smoking cannabis with it's the same as smoking tobacco, and I think that's where the kind of negative views come from it. So I think CBD oil is a good way of taking, well, this is a medical way that you can do it, but this is also a medical way that you can do it that doesn't really have any negative side effects.
Also, just going on that, I think if cannabis becomes legalised straight away, it will take time for the transition period. That it won't be a straight click and now we don't think of it as a negative thing or a positive thing. It will depend on what happens, events that happen and stuff like that.
Would legalised cannabis increase or reduce tobacco use, and what would be the cost to the NHS, do you think?
I personally think it would probably reduce it. I can see that there is an argument that if people are smoking more weed, they would also smoke more tobacco because it's mixed with it. But I also think people could use it as a substitute for tobacco, which would then mean obviously less people smoking tobacco. I mean, I think 78,000 people die every year from tobacco use, and then I think, as I said earlier, that costs the NHS £2 billion every year.
I think also it comes with your preference though, and how you'd like, but with your point of saying that people might use it instead of tobacco, I think you're right that it might reduce, but I think there's also the element of it increasing because people use it with
yeah, but I think that's a minority.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the majority of people. I think I know a lot of tobacco users will probably switch to cannabis because most of them probably want to stop but just can't because it's so addictive, and maybe that they'll try cannabis as a way to get out of that.
Yeah, because I think with like people creating vapes and e-cigarettes, it's they're like, oh yeah, this is a way to stop you smoking, when actually there have been like various news articles of like there's, you know, vape blowing up in a teenager's face, you know, like it's pretty wild.
Yeah. I mean, I think something they have in common, other than obviously being a similar kind of, you know, the way you inhale them, smoking them, is that they're both very sociable, and I think cannabis would be a better way to, you know, socialize with your friends than tobacco.
Can I just say something? I think that once cannabis will be legalized, so people, they won't be really smoking tobacco, because because cannabis will make you feel relaxed, and you don't have to smoke tobacco when you're already relaxed. So it doesn't make any sense to smoke cannabis and then smoke tobacco. Like, you're just gonna kill yourself.
Yeah.
Well, slowly,
I think so too.
There's another question from Emily Harris. Two. If weed was legalised for recreational use, would it have similar laws and attitudes around it as alcohol does now, and would it reduce the amount of alcohol people have?
That's interesting because they're both social things. I think it wouldn't reduce the amount of people who consume alcohol, but it would probably be the same.
Yeah.
Like, because you're using it for, if it's recreational use, you're using it for the same reasons. You're having a good time with your friends. But I don't see alcohol going down anytime soon.
I think alcohol has been around for like so long that, I mean, even with upcoming articles, I saw an article that said it was a scientist said that you know, alcohol is the most poisonous thing you can probably put in your body because you're basically slowly poisoning yourself. But I think just because it's such a massive thing that, you know, you rarely really hear about anyone that doesn't drink, and if it is, it's because they either don't like it or they've had a bad experience with it.
But what if cannabis becomes like that? Like, if it becomes such a big trend and that media infuses it.
But I don't think alcohol's a trend though.
No, but it's become just a normality.
Yeah.
Whereas people are blindly ignoring the negatives. That will probably happen with cannabis.
I mean, I think just going back to the idea of the laws and everything around it, I think it would make sense to have similar laws in terms of like the age you can use cannabis, because similar to alcohol, it's much more damaging at a young age.
Yeah. Well, we're coming to the end now, so does anyone want to make any last comments before we finish? Anyone from the live or anyone from the panel?
Can I have a point. So if weed will be legalized, so people will be like on weekends, people will go out, they will be mixing cannabis and alcohol, which will be very...
That will happen. I think that will happen.
Yeah.
And so everyone will be like smoking cannabis because it's legal now, so no one's gonna like be quiet about that.
But then you have some people who choose not to drink alcohol with all their friends. So there'll be some people who won't smoke.
I mean, I think the most important thing is just education, like because we are much better educated on alcohol than we are on weed. Like most people, even though there are obviously still a lot of people who have alcohol issues, like most people do know about the negatives of it, whereas people don't so much with weed. And I think it's about the education, knowing what's a safe use of it and what isn't.
But I agree kind of with Sergey that I think that will happen, like people will try and experience it to then learn about it. I think that's how the education will go. Like even if you tell young people, oh yeah, it's bad, like you said, I still think that Sergey's right in that it will happen anyway.
Yeah, there's one of the last couple of questions from Joe Mitchell. I do think, well, I don't think it's a question. I do think if it does get legalised, it will still be banned at colleges, as you won't be able to properly focus on the lessons, so it could cause some students' grades to suffer.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's the same with jobs. Like your work performance will just plummet.
I mean, I think it's the same with alcohol though, and with it being a potential replacement for alcohol, that's probably much less damaging as a sort of party drug that young people would be using.
Oh, well, thank you everyone for commenting, and thank you Lena, Neil and Sergey for joining me today and giving your opinions. Thank you for watching this live stream, for joining in with your comments. Make sure to come again for the next episode of The Circle. Goodbye.